here in Nashville, there is a strong movement of homeschoolers. I have various opinions about homeschoolers that I'll keep to myself, but there's a lot of people in our church who homeschool, and they do a homeschool co-op, and once in a while they will ask me to come speak to their group. They'll do a Bible study one night a week or once a month or something. And this particular night I went, they did the worship service, and I remember I walked up on stage and I said, you know, typically I don't use notes, I don't manuscript, I don't have a cute little outline that people can follow. I'm not against that. That's just not the way that I speak. I said, but I generally know what I'm going to say. But tonight I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to say to you. And I said, I don't even know why I'm up here. And I don't even know where this came from. But it must have been what I was thinking about during that week. But what do you do when God doesn't make sense? Do you ever have that in your life? You wonder, what in the world is God doing? You know, Vance Havner said he's heard a few sermons that are about 4 stories too high. Well, he must have heard me speak because I tell lots of stories. But when Sheila and I left, we were house parents at the children's home in Greenville. My father-in-law was the superintendent, and she was in nursing school, and they had some house parents leave. They said, would you mind coming being house parents? We go, yeah, I'm not doing anything anyway. So and it was a wonderful experience. But we answered the call, and we were on our way to Africa. I won't go through that whole story, but it was just, it's always fun, isn't it, to look back on your life and see where God has worked. And where you thought that God didn't make sense, when you look back, it made all the sense in the world. Oh, let me go there a minute. I am going to read scripture in a minute. After high school, I went away to the Ohio State University, where I graduated just right after the Earth's crust was cooling. And I went away to study physical therapy. I wanted to be a physical therapist. I had worked in our local hospital's physical therapy unit. The director of the unit said, she wrote on, when I applied to the school, she wrote on the application, as soon as he gets into school, I will resign and just be a therapist. He needs to take over the department. He's better at this than I am now. And it's because I could deal with people. She couldn't deal with people. But anyway, I applied to PT school and didn't get in. And I go, come on, God, what? Even on the application, it says, what do you plan to do 10 years from now? And on the application, I remember I wrote, I plan to be in Ivory Coast, West Africa, working with Dr. Laverne Miley. How noble of me, right? I said, I have no idea why I didn't get. I said, God, this doesn't make sense. One of my buddies said, my dad said there's going to be jobs for school psychologists. I go, okay, I'll major in psychology. That's how I entered the world of psychology. I graduated with a degree in psychology. I will tell you, I won't tell students this, but C's get degrees. I've got one. All you got to do is get a C, and and it's average. You don't want to be something weird. So I got this degree. We answered the call to go to the mission field, went to Bible college, met this beautiful young girl during drama. I will tell you, we were on the bus. Remember back in those days, some of you may remember that the college was ultra strict. You couldn't touch a girl, couldn't hold hands. We were on drama tour, and we were sitting side by side, had a quilt over our laps because those buses are cold, you know. And I put my hand on the armrest, and she put her hand on mine. No, that wasn't all. She moved her thumb. When she moved her thumb, the 4th of July went off in my chest. I said, this girl is going to marry me. And she did. We got married. I don't remember my wedding, but that's a whole long story. It involves a golf ball between the eyes. That's the honest truth, as if there's a dishonest truth. But anyway, we came to Greenville, And I couldn't find a job. I was too educated or not educated enough. She was going to go to nursing school. My father-in-law, who is the superintendent, says, hey, we need some house parents. You want to do that? And I go, sure. Why not? We're not doing anything else. We had 2 preschoolers at the time, so I got to be Mr. Mom for a year. It was wonderful. Still, we loved our ministry there. But we were headed to the mission field. Didn't know, we assumed that we'd work in the medical work. Went to the state meeting, which was held in Greenville that year. The director of the mission came to us and said, you know, the biggest need we have on the field right now is for house parents at the boarding school for missionary kids. You have had mission training, and now you've had 2 years of experience of being house parents. You're the most qualified people in Free Will Baptist. Will you do it? I said, let me pray about it. When can we leave? And so that started our journey to Africa. You see, all along, I thought God was blowing him. I didn't understand. God did not make sense to me. Got to France. Before we went to Africa, we had to learn to speak French. Learn to slobber eloquently, if you will. Any of you French speakers? You used to be. Well, I will not speak French. Well, I might. Sometimes I take a class like this and go to the first day of language school. In 5 minutes, I could speak to you in French. You would hear me in French, answer me in French. In 5 minutes, I could have you speak in French. How would that be? Pretty cool. I might not do that. But anyway, we got there. We weren't there a month yet. And Sheila says to me, Neil, I've lost all my peripheral vision. All I can see is straight in front of me. I go, why didn't you tell me this? I go, and she said, I'm having these really bad headaches. Well, if you're in language school, you have bad headaches, period. And I said, why didn't you say something? She goes, because we made a commitment to Christ. And I didn't want to stop us. So one of the guys in school with us, his name was Bruce. He spoke French. He was in the advanced class. So he went to the doctor with Sheila. And they came back to the school. And I said, so what did the doctor say? She said, well, my retinas are detaching or have detached. And she said, if I don't have surgery and have it soon, I'll probably go blind. I go, geez, that's not good. I said, well, where do we need to do this? And she said, they gave me 4 options. One was to go back to the States, go to Paris, go to the city of Lyon, which is kind of the medical center of France, or to the closest town, which is Chambéry. And I said, well, let's go back to the States. These are your eyes. I don't want my wife to go blind. She goes, no, we just left. We're not going to go back to the States. I go, well, we'll go to Paris. We knew Paris. We've heard of that place. She goes, no, that's too big of a city. I go, well, let's go to our landlords. We were living with a French family, and we took Bruce with us so he could translate. And they said, oh, you need to go to Lyon because that's where all the good doctors are. So I said, well, let us go upstairs and pray. And so we went upstairs, we prayed, and we came back down. We said, you know, we feel like we need to go to Chambéry. Just a little side story. One of the top eye surgeons in France moved from Lyon that week. You want to guess where he moved? Jehovah Jireh. We got there. Now, here's my point, and I won't go through the whole story, but here's my point. God wasn't making sense to me. I asked the question, why are you letting this happen? I mean, we gave up everything. And we were doing this wonderful thing for God. Why would you let this happen? That did not make sense to me. So what do you do when God does not make sense? By the way, that week, I'd been, during my quiet time alone with the Lord, I'd been going through John chapter 11. I remember that week as she was going to the doctor, I came to verse 35. Anybody know John 11:35? What's it say? Jesus wept. For some reason, I stayed there. For some reason, it was one of those moments I go, I just read that over and over and over. I'm going, what in the world? Well, when they brought her back down from surgery, both eyes were patched and the anesthesia had made her really sick. And she was so sick, she eventually threw up in the bed. And I said, let me go to the nurse's station. So I went to the nurse's station, grabbed one of them by the arm, walked her down the hall, and in my best French said, they started changing her bed, and they were throwing her from side to side. And she goes, Neil, would you please tell him to quit? Please tell him to quit. Can I tell you, with all my heart, I wanted to tell them, please don't, be gentle. Don't. I couldn't. I could say bonjour. Actually, I could say bonjour. But that's it. And I remember I leaned up against a wall and I started crying. That's what men do, I reckon. But I started crying, and guess what? Guess what verse I remembered? And I remembered that he loved me. And he cared about. I don't know. I've never had this experience since then. I have never sensed the presence of God like I did. It was like he just invaded that room, and everything was okay. We spent the next 2 weeks there, but everything was okay. Our French got better because we had no choice. She looked at it, asked for the butter. That's all she could say in French, and I could say hello. But we learned a few things. So what do you do when God doesn't make sense? By the way, there's a passage in the scriptures. You can turn there if you want to, and I may just paraphrase it. If I can get back to it. Remember, John the Baptist was sitting in prison, and he called some of his disciples to him, and he says, will you do this for me? He said, go ask Jesus if he's the one. Now, obviously, John probably knew, but he just wanted to be sure, right? He said, go ask Jesus, are you the one, or should we be looking for somebody else? I just want that. Do you ever just need that assurance? That's why we come to church most. He's not going to preach a sermon that you haven't heard before, right? I mean, seriously, how many sermons have we heard about? We've heard sermons all of our life, but we have to come to get that assurance that all this, we just need that. And here's John sitting in prison, and he senses it, and they said, look, John just wants to know, are you the guy? And here's what he said. Go tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. And the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Why couldn't Jesus just say yes? I mean, seriously? Now, some scholars would say, well, John understood the Old Testament. If you understood the Old Testament, that is pretty clear what Jesus was saying. Okay, but Jesus, come on. Just say, John, I'm the guy. I'm sure John goes, dude, come on. Well, he may not have said dude, but he said, just give me the straight answer. So what do you do when God doesn't make sense? And you've been there, right? How many times in life does, right before Christmas this year, Steve and Judy have been here, Steve and Judy Lytle. It's been a while. They were missionaries in Panama. They have 3 boys, Michael, Phil, and David. David married a young girl, Bethany, beautiful blonde hair girl. Graduated from Welch. David went and got his master's degree. They went to Malaysia and taught in an international school there. They left Malaysia and went to Peru to teach, and were teaching in Peru at this international school. Right before Christmas, Judy came in the office, and at International Missions, we start each day in a prayer time. We have prayer for the needs around the world. Our missionaries, and we pray very specifically for things that we take that very seriously, even though we have a good time doing it. There's a lot of sarcasm, but that's okay. Anyway, Judy says, pray for Bethany. Said she went to the doctor in Peru, and the doctor never really checked her, just looked at her and said, you have breast cancer. I'm going, I'm not sure I like Peruvian doctors who just, I don't know how, he never did x-ray, never did an MRI, any of those things. He said, you have breast cancer. He goes, well, we're going back to the States for Christmas, and said, I'll have it checked when I get there. By the way, they have 3 children, all under the age of 5. She came back, went to the doctor. He checked her. He says, you do have breast cancer. Vanderbilt University, getting ready to have an MRI, and less than 10 days later, she was gone. She had this incredibly aggressive form of breast cancer. And here's a 32-year-old girl, left her husband with 3 little kids, all under the age of 5. What do you do when God doesn't make sense? And these are people who love Jesus. I give you the answer. I can tell you the answer. Because it all comes down, to me, to the question that we always have to ask. Will you trust him, even if he doesn't make sense? Because he will not always make sense. That's why I reject people, TV preachers, if you will, the name it and claim it guys. I'm sorry. When you become a believer, life gets more difficult. It does not get easier if you really live out your faith. Now, there's joy in that journey. There's contentment, there's peace, but it is not an easier life. And if you don't believe that, just live out your faith very radically. And God will not always make sense. And the question always comes down, even when he doesn't make sense, will you trust him? I do this in churches. We were talking about this last night. I'm going to ask you, raise your hand. How many of you trust God? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. How many of you worry? Hold up. I thought you just told me you trusted God. What's that about? I know what it's about. You're just like I am. I trust God for you. I'm just not sure he can handle my stuff, right? You would tell everybody in the church, oh, honey, just trust God. Just trust God. He will get you through this. Man, my family is falling apart. I don't know what to do. Right? Isn't that where we are? I told him this story last night. When you deal with missions, you meet people from all over the world, and I never go anywhere in the world that I don't expect to see somebody I know. And people go, oh, you're in Africa. I had a cousin who was in Africa. Do you know him? That's a pretty big continent, but try me, I might. But my best friend's there. His name is Evan Evans. I think his parents had a sense of humor. His parents were missionaries first in Nepal, and then they got chased out of Nepal, literally ran for their lives, across the Mekong River, ended up in Vietnam, and spent the next 20-some years in Vietnam until the Vietnam War came, and they were some of the last Americans out. 5 of their colleagues were martyred by the Viet Cong. My friend's dad went in and buried them. By the way, I got to meet his dad. He came out to Africa on our first Christmas. I wrote an article about this, or a blog or something. I was dreading our first Christmas in Africa because it's 110. There's not all the stuff that goes on like we have Christmas here. It absolutely was my favorite Christmas I've ever experienced. Ev's dad came out. If you look up life in the dictionary, Ev's dad's picture is there. I've never met a man so full of life I'm sure God didn't make sense to him a lot. But anyway, long story. If you followed international missions, you'll remember in 2002, I think it was, there was a coup in Ivory Coast where our school was. And actually, some of the heaviest fighting was in our town of Bouaké. The school where my wife and I ministered was caught in the middle of the war. They were firing over top of it, and I won't tell you the whole story, other than to say I was on the phone with them a lot during that time. I actually didn't go to bed for 3 days till we got the students out. We were helping negotiate some of getting the French military in there to evacuate 160 kids. But anyway, I called Ev's mom. I talked to Ev, and Ev's mom was retired. Ev's dad passed away, and I said, Mom, I called Ev. I just talked to Ev, and I just want you to know he's fine. Here's this mom's words. Of course he is, Neil. I said, no, I just talked to him. He's doing well. She goes, he is, Neil. I go, she goes, this is his 6th evacuation. We evacuated him 6 times in Vietnam. And she said, Neil, if he gets out, he'll be fine. If he doesn't, he'll be fine. Can I tell you something? That's a mom who trusts God. I wish I had that kind of trust. I'd have been fretting. If that's my daughter, But she said, no, Neil, he'll be just fine. Actually, I didn't tell you guys, I had another call from I tell a story about this guy. He just passed away a couple of weeks ago. His Uncle Frank. He was another dorm parent at the school where we were. He had worked for 30 years in Timbuktu. But he calls me during that time, and he goes, hey, I just heard you on the radio. I go, okay. And he goes, he said, my grandson's there. He said, oh, they'll get him out. I go, where are they taking him? He goes, I don't know. They'll be in West Africa somewhere. We'll find them. I go, aren't you worried? No, I'm not worried. I go, those are people who have learned to trust God even when he didn't make sense. Listen to me. I don't know the theology of this. I'm not a theologian. I'm a shrink. But I do believe this with all my heart, that nothing ever happens in a believer's life that does not first pass through the sovereign hand of God. And if that's true, then you just trust him. And by the way, you put trust in somebody who is always going to be faithful. I have never yet had a time when he was not faithful. When we were sitting in the middle of that hospital in France, 2 country bumpkins in the middle of nowhere, couldn't speak the language. I never even ate. I couldn't go out to eat. I didn't know how to order. The aides figured that out, and they would sneak. If somebody didn't eat their food, they'd sneak the tray into me. Interesting, in the hospital there, they always put a little bottle of wine on every tray. Isn't that interesting? We didn't drink it, but I probably should have. No, I'm just kidding. But here we are, and can I tell you, it was all okay. God provided because we decided that we would just trust him. So my encouragement to you, I don't want to go too far over, is trust God. Just trust God. He will deliver. He will be faithful. Always has been and always will be. Any questions, comments, criticisms, declarations of heresy? Or
during that time that the children were being rescued, we were in a ladies' meeting at the National Convention.
Yes, I remember.
We had stayed on the phone with Clint, and we just stopped everything and went.
I remember that. It was.
We heard that the French soldiers had.
It was a very tense time, I will tell you. I spent most of my time on the phone with the people on the ground because they didn't have to explain where the soldiers were. I could hear the bullets going through the trees.
That's the same school, I think, that Robert and Judy's children.
Yeah, it was. It was. What happened in Africa was the public schools just weren't adequate. And so you had a choice. Either you homeschooled or you sent your kids to boarding school. And our job was, we were mom and dad to 20 high school boys whose parents worked all over Africa. And not just Free Will Baptists. We had from a variety of mission groups. We had boys who were Canadians, Dutch kids, of course, American kids. And I told them last night, the only time in my life that I felt like I did something well was to be a dorm dad. I still hear from my boys every week. One of the guys, and we left in 1987. One of them is now a professor of theoretical solid physics at Oxford. I don't even know what that is. One is a surgeon in the jungles of the Congo. One's a jungle pilot. I've got them all over the world. It's just a marvelous thing. Anyway, thank you all so much. And I'll try not to be real boring later. But I reek with mediocrity. So, yes, we do. Yes, we do. Oops, it's confirmed.
Let's go ahead and hang on to this. Let me.
Which way do I need to turn it?
Let's just turn it off.